Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd. Chris Boyd is a certified financial planner practitioner and senior vice president financial advisor at Wealth Enhancement Group, one of the nation's largest registered investment advisors. We call it Something More because we'd like to talk not only about those important dollar and cents issues, but also the quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Here he is, your fulfillment facilitator, your partner in prosperity, advising clients on Cape Cod and across the country. Here's your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
Thanks for being with us for an episode of Something More with Chris Boyd. I'm here with Jeff Perry and Russ Ball, both from our team, the AMR team at Wealth Enhancement Group. And today we're talking a little bit about with the new administration taking office momentarily. We're talking about what some of the Trump anticipated or discussed topics when it comes to taxes, tariffs, immigration policy, and so on and so forth. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And I get this asked a lot from clients and who come in to the office inquiring, what's your take? How should we be thinking about some of these issues when it comes to the markets and just positioning of portfolios and so forth. So thought that'd be a fun topic for us to talk about. Before we got even started, Jeff's got me all riled up, ready to jump on all these topics and get fired up for our conversation.
I think you were riled up before we started talking off air. I think you came in this morning ready, looking for a fight, quite frankly.
Loaded for bear, huh? Is that what it is? All right. I don't know. But in any case,
it's passion. That's what it is.
So let me start off with a few things, and then we'll dive in. Okay. So, I think big picture, when I've been asked this, I've been saying that, overall right now, the economy is pretty good.
Yeah.
General strength. When we think about the new administration, the expectation is that lower tax rates that we have under the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which has a lower rate of tax for corporations, and it's lower income tax rates that take longer to get into the next rate, and a higher standard deduction. So generally, I know this isn't always the way people talk about it, but in most instances, people pay less income taxation across the board. So that would be beneficial in that consumers keep more money to spend, and corporate earnings, there's less taxation, therefore there's more going into either the shareholders get more of a profit, or they're going back into research and development or whatever it may be. So that's generally on the plus side. I think additionally, you'd argue from a business point of view, from a profitability point of view, the expectation of less burdensome regulatory policy, we can debate whether that's good long-term policy or not, but from a profitability point of view, you'd expect that to be on the plus side for markets and for shareholders, for businesses to do well. When it comes to on the other side, you'd expect the possibility of tariffs being, and I only want to talk about this in a little more detail in just a minute, but you'd expect that to be on the negative side, because that's an added cost. It's a drain on the economy. Then you'd have the question of deportation. There's been a strong argument for stronger border control. I think, honestly, I don't think there's a lot of people opposed to that personally, but the issue then becomes, what do you do with people who are here illegally? I expect there'll be some sort of a big show of some deportation, but I think that the idea of mass deportation becomes really impractical and challenging. So it's again, all these things that where markets, I think, are making assumptions. How much is rhetoric? How much is positioning? And what's actually going to be implemented is to be determined, right? To be seen. But in the meantime, generally, I think the market expects that there's some of these things, but not everything that's been talked about on the campaign trail. And so I think the market seems to be responding, saying all the good stuff mostly, and not so much about the worry stuff. So in any case, that's sort of where I've been trying to set up the positioning of when talking with clients about here's what it looks like, but we have to be watchful of what happens and how this will affect the economy. Let's start with the topic of tariffs, because we were talking a little bit about that before the show started. And I think it's really important that we understand essentially how a tariff works. So essentially, my understanding is if a tariff is applied to, let's say, China, we're going to apply, 10 to 60% on the goods from China.
Well, President Trump has been very clear on that where the starting point with China is 10%.
So this is what's been threatened, I think, through the campaign rhetoric, right?
Right. And last week he kind of doubled down on that.
Let's just assume some element of tariff goes up on Chinese goods, right?
Yep.
Now, that means that the importer, the company trying to import those goods, has to pay more for those goods. That means the U.S. consumer who's going to buy those goods from that importer, whether it's because then it turns into a product or because it is the product, either way, right? Somehow that cost gets passed on to the U.S. consumer. That's a tax. That's a tax increase. It's not necessarily called a tax increase, but it's effectively a tax increase. Now, the reason for it is to try to dissuade the buyer from using that product that is made in this particular instance, China. So to find alternative sources of product, right? Now, but ultimately, let's be clear. It's not China who pays that tariff. It's the U.S. importer or the U.S. consumer that pays for that tax, that cost, that disincentive. So that means there's less, generally, Jeff, I know you're not a fan of taxes, right? More taxes generally thinks it's a slowing economic impact, not generally a favorable position to have. So, I mean, that being said, we do have a pretty big deficit, so maybe there's some favorability. The reality, though, just as an aside, is we've seen this in the past. This is not a new playbook. What happens when one country increases tariffs on another country? The other country says, well, I'm not going to take that. I'm raising tariffs on you on something else. So if you're going to try to import here, we're going to have some cost on you. Or, as we saw, we're going to boycott some of your product when it came to farmers or something like, different goods of one type or another, so resources that we export. So it's not without consequence, and it has generally an effect where it's inflationary. Costs just go up on both sides of the trade arrangement. So in any case, and that affects, one of the things that the Trump administration in the past has been kind of obsessed about is the idea of our trade imbalance. Well, this doesn't help a trade imbalance if you start.
It can help.
It can create a disincentive for people to import our goods, so we have less exports going out.
And I guess that's it's an individual question, country by country, and I hope that President Trump treats it as an individual question. You can make the arguments that there's other reasons besides tax income, and that's the reason for tariffs. You alluded to that, Chris. It's an income generating thing, right? You get
so
money,
it's revenue in for the government, right?
That's right. It also, if there's an unfair trade, not just balance, not just looking at imports versus exports, but import prices and export prices, but looking at fair trade or whether or not there's criminal activity or improper activity going on between the partners.
Well, that's fair.
So it can be can be punitive. It can be sending a message like if you're gonna steal our trade secrets, if you're gonna have slave labor, if you're gonna have this and that.
Totally agree with your point. That doesn't seem to be the case when we talk about China and Mexico, and essentially all these other places that tariffs have been threatened as well.
I don't know if I 100% agree with that. I think it may be implied because those countries both have things that are not doing, different things that those countries are not doing that the United States want them to do. But we could debate that and whether or not it's in the motive of the president and his administration to be part of that. I can see.
I'm not clear. I'd be curious in the case of Canada, for example, what are you
Yeah,
referring
I
to?
didn't put Canada in there. I said China and Mexico.
Okay, Canada and Mexico. I meant to say when I said,
Yeah,
Canada's another one where we've had this
it is, and I'm not.
tariff threat.
I think we're trying to make Canada the 51st state or something. I'm not sure what's going on up there. But for Mexico and China, I think there's reasons to put pressure on their countries to get them to do things that we want them to do. And it's also a way, aside from taxes and aside from political pressure, it's also a way to protectionism, which is certainly a word that can be used under the Trump doctrine, if you want to say that. To protect certain American businesses from unfair trade practices across the globe, if you will, but China and Mexico, and to protect American companies who are competing in those sectors. So I think there's a lot of things other than just, the simple way to look at why we're doing tariffs to punish our enemies, if you will. I think there's other economic reasons to do them. And I just hope it's not broad based. The thing I liked least about some of the President Trump's proposals was tariffs. I'm not in favor of tariffs generally. I think they have a place, but I certainly don't think they have a uniform place to say 25% for everything coming in from a country. I think if they're targeted, if they have a clear economic and
I'm in
political
agreement with you
message,
on that. There can be reasons,
then they can be effective.
Yeah, and I think we've seen this whole question of technology.
Right.
The essentially whether things are being treated properly and fairly with the essentially stealing technological thought
Yeah. Trade
copyright,
secrets and
trade
such.
secrets, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That seems reasonable to me to say, hey, wait a second. I mean, that kind of leads us to one of the other things you had brought up, Jeff, before we got started, was the whole TikTok topic.
Right. That's one of going to be the hot news right after the inauguration here. As we know, when we're recording this, the Supreme Court has a case before them. They have an appeal from TikTok to stay the elimination, basically, of TikTok. Congress passed a law. President Biden signed the law, which would ban TikTok from the United States. The Supreme Court could put that law on a pause, facing further review. They may or they may not. And if they don't, by the time the president takes the oath of office, TikTok, in essence, will be gone from the United States, unless they make some deal with. There's been rumors of deals. Part of the legislation was that TikTok could divest himself of Chinese interest and sell it to an American entity, and TikTok could survive. So at the time of the recording here, there's no deal sealed, but that could happen as well. And then there's some, Russ, we were talking about before the show, there's some kind of political news about TikTok as well, about who might be sitting behind the president, right?
Yeah, so the CEO of TikTok, who's been in front of Congress in all these hearings over the past couple of years, is going to be joining for the inauguration and sitting in a seat of honor behind the incoming president. So a little bit of interesting dynamics there.
Yeah, no kidding. It feels like it's a political message, right? I mean, President Trump's been saying that he in essence asked the Supreme Court to stay the decision so he could try to make a deal, right, instead of TikTok being banned.
Which is kind of a change in his position from a couple of years ago. He had a very different kind of rhetoric around this.
He did,
and I think that his win, he said TikTok was very useful in the campaign process, and I think he kind of changed his tune around TikTok.
It's really put Republicans in a odd spot, because most Republicans, I don't know if it was all, but most Republican legislators, it was not all, there were a few that voted against the bill, but most Republican senators and reps voted to ban TikTok. So now they're having to answer that question of, what do you think about President Trump's change of opinion?
Just as an aside, what are your thoughts around this this notion of that this creates the potential for some threat to the U.S. National security?
I thought the bill was fairly balanced. It balanced national security interest, concerns about issues with personal information and certain content getting to children, but it didn't say this has to be banned. It set some reasonable conditions to address those specific concerns.
Yeah,
And the Supreme Court basically agreed with that part of that the bill was constitutional. So I thought it was a balanced bill, and
the most plausible is to have it sold, right?
that's right. That's right.
That
still could happen.
The concern is that the current arrangement has ties to the Chinese government, and
right.
that could be used in an adversarial way.
That's right. And I think that's legitimate. I think as this world turns more and more to everything being online and the use of AI and the way, communication and false communication and manipulative communication has been in existence between adversaries, from planes dropping leaflets, till now. It's all in our social media and television and such, and radio, right? That's right, Chris. So we do have to be aware of it, and we do have to be vigilant to protect our military and social and protect
totally. I mean, I think it's going to create a little bit of an uproar if they actually have to close it down. I think they're trying to. I think that's the position that seems to be put forth right now, is we're not going to sell, therefore they're going to create a lot of angst among American users of TikTok with the frustration of that, and then so that there'd be some kind of backlash, and the expectation that it would therefore be reversed. But
President Trump cannot reverse it. No,
it's law,
it's
right?
Law, so it would take an additional act of Congress, and that would mean something that legislators do not like to do, is to change their vote.
Yeah, reverse themselves.
In the matter of a year, it would be less than a year that they'd be saying, "Oops, I changed my mind." So,
well, the way it would happen is it gets slid in with something else, right?
It could, but I think
I really liked this one, but I just had to go along with it.
I guess they
could make it. I mean, honestly, I hope it's like they take the position of like, these are your options, A or B. What do you want to do?
If I was a member of Congress or the Senate, I would not change my vote. If I was that convinced that it was a national security threat, I think it would be very hypocritical to say now it's not, unless they came up with some new arrangement on how the data is stored and such, But
all right, let's move on from TikTok. Although it's an interesting topic, let's talk more about what are some of the things that are anticipated under the Trump administration that people think could move markets or have economic impact that ultimately would have some consequence. So we talked briefly about tariffs, the idea that, I mean, I put this in the negative column personally. I understand your point, Jeff, that sometimes there's like targeted reasons to.
I think it could be either. It could definitely be a negative if it's just broad-based, punitive and no real
and it's
logic.
Inflationary, I think, and I think it's likely to be retaliated, and therefore, you get into this like, everyone gets wet. You know what I mean? It's not a great outcome.
Or it could be a great tool to get our adversaries, or countries that we want to do things, to be more cooperative in doing the things that protect America.
We'll see. And I suppose if you're using it for not just purely in this realm of tariff thought process, but other kinds of national security or, leverage for one thing or another, there could be some virtue in that. How it applies. It does seem right now that, when it comes to China, they're in an economic less leverage and coming from less from a position of strength than they might have at other times.
China is, yes.
China, yeah.
Yeah.
So you do probably have the opportunity to use something like this for leverage and other elements of your negotiations, perhaps.
Yeah.
So, and with Trump, maybe that's the game plan. He's all about the negotiations,
Part of the deal.
Art of the deal. So, well, let's see what happens with tariffs. How much is rhetoric and how much is actually going to be implemented? I think that's rubber meets the road question. How's this really play out?
And those are within his discretion. Some of the things that we're talking about, TikTok and taxes, maybe we'll move on to taxes, but
Sure.
those items and most items, quite frankly, take the act of Congress.
Yeah, it's a good point. The tariffs do not. It's
Right.
it's within the purview of the executive branch.
Mm-hmm. And
So,
President Biden continued, just to,
yeah,
I know we're trying to get away from tariffs, but some of these tariffs are in existence today. So,
yeah, I mean, President Trump implemented tariffs on China originally, right?
mm-hmm.
And the Biden administration didn't change that at all,
Right.
which you would have thought just policy-wise, they might have been in a different perspective or whatever. But they really maintained the same game plan.
It would have been difficult for President Biden to do so. The relationship with China has degraded. In fact, we had a period where we weren't even communicating with China, even on the secure military to military communication. So I think it would have been difficult for him to ease up on China when kind of the relationship was so bad.
Yeah.
So thinking about taxes, which is something our clients are asking us a lot too, will the 2018 Tax and Jobs
Act,
right, be extended? And if it is extended, does it look the same as it does today?
And of course, again, this is an element of crystal ball gazing to know what will happen. I think it is widely expected, though, that the essence of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which is some of these key parts of it, would be extended.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's, again, it's a tight Congress, and as much as it is Republican leadership presently when it comes to both houses of Congress, it's pretty thin majorities, and it might not be as easy as we just on its face what you might expect. But I would say I think that there's hope, expectation that just the current status quo gets extended. Now, the problem, of course, is we continue to be operating at a pretty big deficit. And 1.9 trillion, I think we said previously, that was last fiscal year. We still don't have any kind of budget for this year. We're operating on last year's
we're good
game
till
plan,
March, right?
Right. So and by then we're halfway through the fiscal year, right? So you got to assume it's going to be something similar next year. 2025 rather, this year.
I hope not, but there's no reason to really be optimistic about
it. So that leads us to this, question of, is it good policy from the point of view of the growth of our debt, or that issue, but from the idea that there's less government burden, there's more money in my pocket, I've got more money to spend, that's good for consumption. We're a 70% consumer driven economy. By and large, that sounds like lighter load on taxes generally is good.
So
that kind of mindset.
My crystal ball has me thinking that to get the tax cut bill passed again, this is it's contrary to good government policy on how to do this. It's contrary to thinking about the debt, but this is what I think is going to happen. SALT, state and local taxes, which impact typically states that have high property taxes and high state taxes.
Typically blue states, incidentally.
Typically blue states. California, New York, New Jersey, just Connecticut maybe, just to name Massachusetts, I guess.
Massachusetts, yeah.
So to name some states. So I think there's a lot of pressure from Republican members of Congress, and certainly Democrat members of Congress agree with eliminating SALT. So if you have a bill to extend the tax cuts for a period of time,
Just to be clear, so for right now, there's a cap. I think it's
$10,000.
$10,000. Is that what it
Right.
is? Of
Yep.
what you can deduct when you have these expenses that you were just talking about.
Yeah. And for many people in those states, their income tax and their property taxes are combined is over 10,000. Never mind if they have a second home or a super
Right.
high income or whatever.
So
So
state and local taxes, SALT ends up being limited as to how much you can deduct, and it
right.
doesn't work too well.
So if they eliminate
That
the SALT
limitation.
provision, it allays the Republican members from those states. California and New York are really the only ones that have many members of Congress. But it
Mm.
also makes it difficult for Democratic members who have run on this issue. And so I think that's one of the things they'll do. Of course, that's bad for the national debt and deficit.
Right.
But even more disappointing, if you will, for good government, lower taxes is good government. So I don't want to make it sound like it's not. But I think the tax bill, the border bill, and some other types of bills are going to be in one bill that are going to be released as this massive piece of legislation, the Trump proposal, the Trump desires, right? The things he ran on is going to be put together in one single bill, February or March, and they're going to try to get it done all at one time. So they're going to use all the pressure of, if you want better immigration, you have to vote for this bill. If you want lower taxes, you have to vote for this bill. And if you don't vote for this bill, you're voting against all those good things. So it will put
well, good luck with that. Well, number one, that's entirely hypocritical based on, if you remember, you have to pass it to read it kind of thing.
Single subject rule,
Yeah.
all those things.
But anyway,
that's what my crystal ball is telling
it
me
seems
is
like
going
it's
to
probably
happen.
the most plausible way that it would get passed. A number of things
It holds the Republicans in line, because if they don't vote for it, they're going to be voting. If they vote no, they're going to be voting no on immigration reform. They're going to be voting no on tax decrease and no on whatever else is in there that is on the Republican agenda.
Now, in the campaign trail, the president elect, now probably on the day this airs, the president talked about eliminating taxes on Social Security benefits, eliminating taxes on tips.
Yeah,
forget
I don't
what
know.
else.
I don't know if they're going to be in there. I don't know if that
I
was.
think that's going to be really hard to include all that stuff, but yeah, I'm sure that'll be an effort to see what he can get in there.
Yeah, I think not at this point. I think I think they won't formally take it off the agenda, but if they put too much of,
just try to extend what's there and then
do some immigration stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so that leads to immigration with the topic. One is border control. I think there's no question we're going to see a more significant emphasis on border safety, border security. What that translates to in terms of more infrastructure for the existing structure of trying to do more legal immigration, the processing of legal applications, which is a big delay. I mean, it's a long delay for people who are trying to pursue the immigration through the legal process.
The system is overwhelmed, obviously.
Yeah, so I think you need more infrastructure there as part of the solution, but in addition to the security of don't want people sneaking in. The bigger question, I guess, becomes what will really happen relative to the rhetoric around deportation.
I think it's pretty clear if you listen to Horman, who's going to be President Trump's border czar, if you will, and the president himself. Recently, his tone on immigration has changed from the campaign rhetoric a bit.
Yeah,
being targeted against criminal aliens, people who are illegally or here legally, but on a, temporary basis. If they commit certain crimes, they had a big debate last week in Chicago where they tried to, the city council tried to void the previous law that Chicago wouldn't work with ICE, and so this discussion's happening around the country. And I think that the first thing, is so big that I don't know if you get to the second thing of getting the people out of the country who are committing crimes, harming children, not being good citizens, if you will.
Yeah.
I think there's enough work there to keep everybody busy and the system busy. On the other end of that spectrum,
and I would think you'd have more political cover, more
Correct.
support for that kind of thing to say, look, these are people who are putting our citizens at risk. That's one thing. And I think most people would say, oh, okay, yeah, I agree with that.
That is the low hanging fruit in this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a term that we use. So I think that's where that goes. And on the other end of the spectrum are the dreamers, and dreamers are defined as a minor that was taken into the country, not on their own, taken in, either smuggled in by a parent or, across the border with a parent. And the child, if you will, at the time had no criminal intent, no intent at all. They're just going where they're told to go.
Yeah.
And now they become part of the
their
United
culture,
States.
their experience, they've been raised in this country, really have no ties to anywhere else.
They speak English. They've attended school. They, depending on how old they are. I mean, some are in first grade now, and some are 30 years old, right? So,
right.
And President Trump just last week made comments about that was something that was on his agenda as well. So, those two things in the immigration debate are the easy and right things to do. Deporting people who aren't supposed to be here, who are harmful to our society, criminals, let's work on that. And the people who are all but, for that they weren't born here, have been good American citizens, they didn't violate a law intentionally.
Yeah.
I think that's where you start. I know there's a big middle there. There's a lot
of
people.
No, but I think you're right. That
you
I think you can get a lot of support around both ends of that spectrum.
And why not do the things that most Americans support? It makes our country safer and make people have the legal ability to work and be good citizens.
So I think, when you talk about that and the economic consequence of that, you think, okay, that's palatable. It's not something that's going to be disruptive to the economy. The idea of deporting every person who's here illegally, though, fair in some sense, okay,
Sure.
it's violates our laws, that's one thing, but as a practical reality, that becomes really disruptive to the economy and obviously these individuals, but the economy impact. We're already short of labor. And if we then scoop out, I don't know how many million people that is from
10 million, maybe
10 to 20, I think I've heard, right? Anyway, whatever
a low
it is,
number on it on purpose. Meaning,
yeah,
at least.
So you have this, if you had this enormous, and the logistics of that and the cost of that and just the whole endeavor would be so enormous. I think, maybe there's an element of, hey, we do some deportation and try to encourage self-deportation, that people go, oh, they're cracking down, I better go home, that kind of thing. But by and large, I think, what we often forget is that we're not growing as a nation demographically by births. And for an economy to grow and expand, in our case, part of the way it's grown and expanded historically has been because of demographic considerations. We've had more consumers, growing population, and we rely in part on immigration for that. Now, we want that to be legal immigration, but the reality is too, we do have people here who spend money, who are consumers, who are here as part of that group that you're talking in the middle, right? That's like, where do we go? So I just think there's likely to be a challenge for the economy in terms of labor and in terms of the consumer impact. It is an economic component as well as all these other dimensions of the issue.
And if you tried to do that first, you don't have the resources to do the other ends of the spectrum.
Right.
So, and it's not going to work. So
it just seems unlikely, I guess, is the expectation. You're not going to have as much of that.
I don't think so.
So I think the market generally, I think, has dismissed some of that talk as not actually likely to happen, and therefore less worrisome as an economic consequence, and therefore how does it affect the markets, that kind of thing.
I would agree with that. And Trump's going to be able to fulfill his broader promise.
Yeah.
If the border is actually secure and he's decreasing the number of criminals who happen to be illegal in the United States, and there's a lot of news on that, and the Dreamer question is solved. If those three things happened, I think he would deserve an A+ on his immigration policy if those get done in 4 years.
What were some of the other topics that you thought would be relevant to discuss here, Jeff?
Well, you touched on, it's not a real exciting one, but it is impactful, I think, is the regulatory environment. The rules and regulations that agencies make. Sometimes Congress passes broad, inspiring laws that will do X, Y, or Z, and they leave it to the agencies to promulgate regulations. And oftentimes it's a complaint of conservatives, including myself, that these regulatory agencies act beyond the scope, or they
have broad powers that are
somewhat
right. You question, is this beyond their legislative
beyond the intent of the legislation?
Yeah.
And it comes up in all forms of businesses, but some of the two industries that I think the prognosticators are thinking will be benefited by this less regulation or deregulation is energy, right? More energy development, more drilling, drill baby drill, and the finance industry, quite frankly, who there's a general consensus among Republicans that the financial industry has been overregulated by the previous administration, the Biden administration.
So I think it's interesting. I bet a lot of people would be surprised to know that we produce more oil than ever before. That people think, drill baby drill, that there's been some restraint, because of public lands and things like this that may be publicized. But when it comes to output, the U.S. is doing a great deal of oil production. We are a net exporter of energy when it comes to that kind of thing. So this also ties into that question of when you think about what will be the impact of, say, a more liberal regulatory policy in the case of energy, as an example. You might expect energy stocks to do better. When you look at the past Trump administration, energy did not do as well under that administration because the prices went down, I guess, and therefore the profitability went down.
Yes, that's right.
Just a greater supply, and the opposite is true under the Biden administration. You'd have thought it would be the other way around, that energy stocks wouldn't do as well. It's one of these things where things don't always move the way you expect.
You can't look at it overly simply.
It's not as simplified as that. Yeah. So in any case, but yeah, I think there is expectation that those are two examples. What was the second one that you mentioned, by the way? It was securities, financial.
Yeah, the financial sector. Yeah.
And one of those instances, the current SEC chair, who is being
resigning,
replaced,
right?
has been pretty antagonistic toward cryptocurrency, and desiring to limit access, or in terms of products like ETFs and mutual funds. They've been sort of guarded about this, from the idea that this may not be always something consumers understand, and would it be in their best interest, that kind of thing.
I think he was right, by the way, to go slow and make sure we don't just jump in.
And I think that you're right, that this that Gensler was really more of a challenging, trying to add some regulatory burden, trying to be more proactive in a consumer protection kind of mindset. But in any case, so we'll see what that translates to.
Well, the market certainly thinks it's Wild West is coming because its price has gone up substantially. Bitcoin, people, there's lots of cryptocurrencies, but
Yeah.
people, casual viewer has heard of Bitcoin and maybe they follow the price a little bit.
Yeah.
CNBC's flashing it every 30 seconds on the TV. So price of Bitcoin's, when I'm talking today here, I think it was around $100,000, and that's up, from the $70,000 range right before the election, and it had gone up before that in speculation that Trump could win. So it certainly thinks that Trump is going to be favorable to the industry.
Yeah, I think that's very true. That's its own show. I mean, let's have more conversation about cryptocurrency sometime
Or it's a
soon.
bubble. There you go.
It just seems like I think it's a topic that's worthy of more in-depth conversation. I've heard repeatedly on the campaign trail that we really don't need an education department. What are some other examples of deregulation that might?
Energy department, I think, is in that same bucket of things that might disappear. I'm not sure it's going to happen.
I don't know that it'll actually disappear in any of these instances, but what's the idea that government is an organism that doesn't like to shrink or something?
Well, we have another. I don't know. It's not an agency. We have a group led by Ramaswamy and Musk, who are delegated with the task of doing just that. Doge, they call it, which is, I don't want to go back to cryptocurrency.
Yeah,
but it is the same.
I have a client who said, I'm going to buy that just because I think there's a lot of people, because of this Doge department, that are going to.
Stranger things have happened, right?
Yeah. And so far it's worked to his advantage. I don't know.
Remember the .com days?
Recently, Elon Musk was bringing down his estimate for how much he's gonna be able to cut. I think it went from 2 trillion to 1 trillion. And he's like,
I mean, he's down. Now he's actually done some homework. He realizes it's going to be harder to do than he planned, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I agree with you, Chris. Government is ever expanding, and it's a natural growth of government where either under both parties.
Yeah.
I mean, conservatives, Republicans, we try to. The rhetoric is we want it to be small, but actually it's not made smaller when we're in office, unfortunately. But if it's ever going to happen, this is the opportunity that it could happen, because you have a president who campaigned on it. He created an entity to focus on it, whether or not it can achieve what number of
how much fraud, waste, and abuse, that kind of thing that we always talk about. How much really they can identify and eliminate. It's
there, whether or not they can identify and eliminate it, but it is there. And so I think that's going to be one of the more entertaining aspects of this next administration, in a good way, is when they expose whatever they find, and there's a public debate of, for example, should we be paying hundreds of millions of dollars to subsidize public radio today? I think that's a good debate that the country should have. Where we are in our society and how we get information and the resources available is certainly different than when this started. Should we be doing that? And I know when this debate comes up, it's only a very small part. It won't mean anything to the national deficit.
Yeah.
But when you have all of these things, assuming they find hundreds of things like that, which I think they will, it does add up to something, and it does matter. So I look forward to that entity releasing information and the public debate around it, and hopefully finding some things to reduce our burden.
I think one of the things that is undiscussed and maybe underestimated is the uncertainty that comes with the Trump experience, right? That there's a little bit of chaos that surrounds Trump when it comes to his management style.
There's no uncertainty there, Chris.
Yeah,
it's going to be that. I mean, that's there's nothing new there.
And
We
so
can't
my
expect
point
that to
is
go away.
the market impact that can have is what I'm driving at. That we may have some unanticipated moves just because of the way things are communicated. The I think there's perpetually the notion that I remember in the last administration, it was drinking from a fire hose, just trying to keep up with what was being talked about, what were some of the things being attempted to be addressed. And there's some sleight of hand in the way that's dealt with, where we're looking over here, but there's something happening over there. And I think that's just an element that we have to be mindful of. There's other variables in terms of foreign interactions, and what does that create for market,
Well, the last 4
insecurity.
years have been full of them. We had a calm president, I'll give you that, but we've had a increasing geopolitical scene. So I'm
How
not
does
sure
that play out over time?
it
Yeah.
has the potential to get better. Of course, it has the potential to get worse. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't, but I think having a strong president who talks the talk of peace through strength, and in his first year, his first term, certainly exercised that, and we had more peace than we have today. I'm hopeful that that's a positive that we see in all the noise. I hope it's a positive element of it.
I think the other variable that we just will have to see how it plays out is how well does Trump and the Congress get along. Will there be a collaborative effort, or will there be antagonism? And
I think the first day is the best day. That's
yeah,
why.
I
That's
do
why.
too. I think you're right.
That's why I think this bill that my crystal ball I referred to
Yeah,
is coming out is a recognition
urgent.
of let's get done what we can get done, because the closer we get to the next election, I know it's 2 years away, but the less likely members of Congress are going to be willing to go along with everything that they have to answer for in the
Well, and
months that
I'm
get
really
closer.
concerned about March with the debt ceiling, and just how that plays out and how that gets positioned. I just think there's a real, I don't know, I feel more worried about it this time than in the past.
We may see the elimination of the debt ceiling.
I think that would be a favorable thing. And to deal with these issues on the budget,
Hmm.
that's where it belongs. Where are we going to spend the money or not? Not at the time when we have to pay the bill that we've already spent.
I think
You know,
the idea of a debt ceiling it had merit, but I don't think it's worked out. It hasn't worked out because it
yeah,
hasn't meant anything other than stress on the system and fear in the markets. So
it's a good point.
it's not
It's a good
serving
point.
it's not serving a purpose. We need a better way.
Well, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to cover. We covered a lot, and I feel like we went a little long, very long, but it was entertaining for me. I enjoyed the conversation. Anything you want to add to something, Jeff, that we didn't get to talk about?
No, just be positive and enjoy the next 4 years of a wild ride. Let's hope it's good.
Yeah, let me just mention that. Look, as you're thinking about these issues, a lot of times people will make the primary
Right.
decision factor in their portfolio and financial planning considerations. We generally discourage that. It's not to say it's not relevant. It's not to say it's not part of the equation, but we can be driven to the extremes of, oh, I'm out, the crazy town, or I'm out when the other guys are in, like this notion of, if it's not your cup of tea for who's running, in this case, the presidency or the Congress, you might be inclined to say, oh, I want, it's bad, whatever. Don't necessarily do that. When you look back at various instances, I've had clients who are Democrats, and I've had clients
Right.
who are Republicans, and we probably have the same kind of reaction when the other team wins.
Yeah, it's just going to be a different group of clients in the next 4 years than it was in the previous 4 years.
And what ends up happening is, when we look back over a 4-year period, almost always markets are benefited from time and, increasing in profitability. So don't overreact. But
Yeah,
if you have challenges, if you're or you want to be discussing, you can overreact on the other side too, taking more, abundance of risk because of your optimism or whatever. When it comes to thinking about your portfolio and you need a little bit of interaction in that process. Sometimes, Jeff, when you came in before you were part of our team, you were looking for someone to challenge your assumptions,
that's
to
right. I came in as a client, if you will.
and saying, what am I missing? Is there something I'm not seeing that you might see? Sometimes there's virtue in that, getting a second opinion, and
Right.
if you need a little help in that process, that's what we do. That's how we're here. So let us know if we can be a help to you in your financial planning and portfolio management. And then thanks for listening. And until next time, everybody, keep striving for something more.
Thank you for listening to Something More with Chris Boyd. Call us for help, whether it's for financial planning or portfolio management, insurance concerns, or those quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Whatever's on your mind, visit us at somethingmorewithchrisboyd.com or call us toll free at 866-771-8901. Or send us your questions to amr-info@wealthenhancement.com. You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd Financial Talk Show. Wealth Enhancement Advisory Services and J. Christopher Boyd provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. Wealth Enhancement Group cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.